effectivement, le temps directeur de la coopération. Le second exposé de cet après-midi sera, compte tenu des contraintes du temps, sera celui du président de la commission de la CAC, qui interviendra à 14 h ici, en ligne, en vidéoconférence. Donc son lien lui a été donné et son équipe se prépare, il va passer en vidéoconférence tout à l'heure. Le troisième exposé est celui notamment de ce qu'on appelle conseiller principal de l'ambassadeur secrétaire général de la ZLECAF. Il s'appelle M. Peter Jour, qui est venu ici en tant que chef de délégation et représentant personnel de son Excellence, M. l'ambassadeur secrétaire général de la ZLECAF. Donc voilà les trois exposés qui vont conclure cette session inaugurale de tout à l'heure. Sans plus tarder, compte tenu notamment des contraintes de temps qui sont les nôtres, je voudrais donner la parole au docteur Ikobi Kofa pour véritablement sa leçon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
I'm looking forward to a resounding good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
I would like to really thank the leadership of Eric and Mr. Martin in particular for putting together this important event. And you all heard this morning from the minister about how this is almost a survival time for Africa. We are in a survival mode. And what happens when we are in a survival mode? What happens? In a survival mode, we tend to be exceptional. We discover how exceptional we are. We discover how the strength, the resilience that we never really used. We discover that the brain has infinite capacity. And we tend to use our brain at maybe even 10%. So this is the time for us to push the boundary of the brain to achieve the challenge, to meet the challenge that the continent is facing. I think I've been asked to really lay the ground as to why the AFCFT is important and what will be the new mandate of Eric in that context. It is fascinating time for the continent. It's quite interesting to see that Eric is actually playing a major role in that transformation, which is only. And let me go back to saying that it's quite interesting that on this history-making day, when Eric is 50 years old, in 2021, and the AFCFT entered into force in 2021. It's an amazing coincidence. And how do we position Eric to become the new engine for implementations of the continent, and specifically for Africa economic integrations? I think on behalf of President Ibrahim, who could not be here, we are just closing on the Inter-African Trade Fair held in Doha last week today. So I've been dispatched here to make sure that Afcft is part of this event, that we fully support. I would like to thank and congratulate actually the government of Cameroon for organizing such an important conference on the African continent of free trade and the dynamics of regional integrations. The key question I have is that how will the AFCFT affect the dynamics of regional integrations in a continent where integration has been seen as both a mean for economic development, but also an end in itself? Remember, Kwame Nkrumah, we must unite for perish. I think I was very pleased to hear the song this morning from the chorus. It was a powerful song in terms of info economic integrations. And how will the AFCFTA affect the dynamic of integrations in a continent where integration has been both a means but also an end? Is actually a very important research question for both economists and political scientists that you are. In a world where economy has become the most essential instrument and vector of our projections, economic diplomacy, which involves trade negotiations, has become even more important, playing, I believe, an increasing role in the process of African renaissance and effective integrations into the global economy as a powerful force. A very interesting coincidence, as I said, a good one, is for Eric to be celebrating his 50th anniversary, the year it comes into force. Perhaps, in my view, this important and timely development has created a new mandate, a continental mandate for Eric, revitalizing economic diplomacy to drive the process of integrations in the Afcft and reposition Africa as a global powerful house. In other words, Eric, 50 years later, can easily become a driving force, not only to implement the Afcft, but also to position the African continent as a global powerhouse, able to compete against the US, China, or the European Union. In this context, it's encouraging to see that Eric has already, in my view, undergone an important intellectual metamorphosis that is reshaping the dynamics of international relations. At the same time, it is also encouraging to note that steps are being taken to enhance the relevance of that metamorphosis with a view to fostering economic cooperations and deepening regional integration within the context of the Afcft, which, as you all know, establishes the largest free trade area in the world, at least by membership, 1.3 billion consumers, a GDP, combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. But also, we expect consumer spending and business spending to reach or exceed 6.7 trillion within 2030, less than a decade from now, making Africa really not only a great market, but also potentially the leading driver of growth. If you look at the demographic, it suggests that consumption as a driver of growth will be in this continent and nowhere else by the time we get to 2030. The Afcft has been touted, as you know, as a major institution by major institutions such as IMF, the World Bank, UNTAD, but also Afcft as a game changer. And our research actually shows that the potential is significant. In fact, at Afcft, we refer to the Afcft as a globalization game changer. It will change the way the globe has actually functioned up to now. We call it a globalization game changer for the tremendous potential it has to defragment African economies and accelerate the diversification of sources of growth, to boost African trade, and infinitely enhance African integrations into the global economy. And this is very important. Because look at the global trade, essentially, it's driven by manufactured goods with increasing technological content. What does that mean? It means unless we move into that space, our share of global trade will be not only confined to less than 20%, but decreasing over time, because the trend is trade to be dominated more and more by manufactured goods. We are 17% of the world populations. Our share of global trade is less than 3%. Unless we shift the pattern of trade and get into manufacturing, there will never be a consistency between our population share and our share of global trade. The Afcft has a potential to facilitate that and move Africa into manufacturing. And empirical results are quite interesting and convincing in that regard. I think, according to what simulation we've done using even CGE models, the Afcft has a potential to boost intra-African trade by more than 20% within the next decade, the first decade of 8 implementations. In addition to increasing market efficiency and reducing the cost of doing business, as growing number of firms take advantage of rising economies of scale to spread the risk of entering small markets across the continent. The Afcft, the ZLECAF, will actually ease investment flows and shift the composition of foreign direct investment to accelerate that transformations. I think up until now, FDI flows into this continent has gone to gold and diamond, petroleums, in the worst case, timber. And we see that across the board. We call it the vulture investment, the vulture FDI. They come and then leave with really no prospect in terms of lifting per capita income or raising living standard, because it's so concentrated and the spread is just not there to achieve the desired development, welfare, benefit. And the Afcft will change. We've seen some benefit already, specifically in the automotive industry. We've seen Volkswagen building a plant in Rwanda to produce cars. And that tiny little market, we believe that, although even though they're in Rwanda, their eyes are in Tanzania next door, which is a much larger market. We've seen Peugeot doing the same thing in Kenya, the plant. So we see already increasing investment, what we call the patient capital. The patient capital, driver transformation. I mentioned Kenya and Rwanda, I also mentioned Namibia, where we have Nissan and Peugeot building manufacturing plant to boost production. These are very positive development, clearly suggesting that there will be tremendous benefit in terms of structural transformation to the African economy. But the welfare benefits of the Afcft are just as important. In particular, simulation shows that the Afcft will actually accelerate the transitions towards a more inclusive growth models. We've seen that the result, empirical result, clearly shows that wages for both skilled and unskilled labor will increase significantly. And with those of unskilled labor rising faster, what does that mean? We're essentially entering inclusive growth models, moving away from immiserizing growth models. We've seen growth, dynamic growth, without improving living standards. What we need in this country is no longer immiserizing growth. What we need are inclusive growth to change the living standard, to see the benefits spreading out across socio-economic groups, but also more broadly across the whole continent. So this is another benefit of the Afcft. But by turning the page on the immiserizing growth model, which has been characterized by persistency of high poverty rates and, let's say it, deterioration of living standards, the Afcft will actually create a condition for greater social cohesions, for lasting security and long-term prosperity. It will create conditions for increasing social cohesions, for lasting security and prosperity. As you know, income inequality sometimes is what fuels insecurity in some part of the world. The African Export-Import Bank is actually supporting the process. And as you know, last September, less than 2 months ago, President Rama, our leaders, was actually here in Yaoundé in Cameroon to officiate the opening of our Central African branches, which we see as the neurologic center to actually project the Central Africa region into the continent, but also globally. And during that opening ceremony, they actually committed to injecting all to $500 million within the sub-region to support the transformations. And it's so key to fostering integrations, but also increasing international trade, which within the CEMAC is very low, less than 2% of total trade, which is really very bad, in saying that it exposes the region excessively to adverse global shocks. The moment you have the shocks at the global level, at the true commodity prices of demand, we feel it more strongly because of that low international trade. Where international trade has been large enough, it has acted as an absorber of global shocks. I think Afrexim Bank, using Cameroon and Central Africa regions as last brand, played that important role. At the continental level, the Inter-African Trade Fair held in Durban last week is actually a very important step by the bank to address the trade information gap and boost international trade, which at 15%, as said earlier by the minister, remain very low if you compare that to Europe, 72%, or Asia, 52%. I think, yes, it's very low, but it provides rooms for it to grow, and the Afcft will essentially play that role in boosting the share of intra-African trade in total African trade. However, I think in addition to the trade fair, which is a major initiative in partnership with the African Union Commissions, here represented by Jean Bertrand, with the ZLECAF, but also African governments. The bank also has a number of key initiatives. I will list a few of them here, just for the sake of it. And the first is what we call the Afcft adjustment facilities. In other words, once we move into the AFC implementations, there will be fiscal adjustment costs. And how do we make sure that these fiscal adjustment costs are not a burden on government to the point they will actually undermine their commitment toward the AFC implementation? I think the bank has put a lot of resources into it. Will actually mobilize more to reach out to $8 billion to make sure that every single country which is feeling the heat of their transitions in the free trade area will not be penalized in terms of fiscal revenue and so forth. The second initiative, just as important, if not more important and urgent, it's our Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS. The key constraint to trade, intra-African trade, and trade in general in Africa is what we call the liquidity constraint. There's not enough dollars or euros to finance African trade. And you know, after the financial crisis, we saw a lot of foreign banks leaving the corresponding banking space, making it difficult to actually finance within the markets. And to address the liquidity constraint, to make sure that the US dollar, the euro constraint is not a problem for financing intra-African trade. The Pan-African Payment Settlement System will actually create the conditions for trading using local currency. And that will help a lot in assuaging the liquidity constraint, but also in boosting African trade by reducing the foreign currency content of intra-African trade. We also have the African Quality Assurance Center, AQUAC, for testing, certification, and inspections to ensure that African products actually manufactured to international standards. I think that will no longer be a constraint of trade. We'll make sure that we have a certification center inspection to really make sure that the margin of error on African wood is as small as possible. Then we have something very important, especially for young African entrepreneurs, startup, what we call FEDA, Fund for Export Development in Africa, which provides equity financing to African entrepreneurs to make sure that no single great idea with the power to transform this continent will die in a drought because there's no financing for it. I think our president is so committed to faith. We'd like to see the young Bill Gates of tomorrow born in this continent and grow to become multinational companies, leading the transformations in the world, leading the frontier in technology, as we've seen within the context of the IT revolutions. Then there is the African Collaborative Transit Guarantee scheme to facilitate seamless movement of goods and services across borders and to reduce transit bonds, which, as you know, is the major constraint for the continent, especially given the number of landlocked countries that we have across the regions. And finally, on the products, I'd like to mention the commitment to increasing the financing of African trade. I think the last 4 years, the bank has actually injected $20 billion to the financing of African trade, Our goal in the next 5 years of Afcft implementation is to raise that number to $40 billion. In other words, financing intra-African trade should no longer, growing intra-African trade should no longer be constrained by financing. But history is very important. Tell us that major initiatives, those that are transformational, the game-changing one, are essentially initiatives that can escape the primary and original architect without losing the original structure and design. Repeat, they can actually escape the primary original architect without losing the original design, structure, and objective. In other words, we also conceive the Afcft and pass it on to you, confident that their design and objective isn't going to be affected by making this become a popular product, owned by every single African, owned by every young scholar. People like us will be gone very soon now. It will be up to you, the younger generations, to deliver this continent, to make sure that the renaissance actually happens. In other words, the future of the continent depends more on you than on me, because really, we belong to us. We'll soon be forgotten. You are our future, and we owe you to actually value you and empower this younger generation as much as we can to make sure they will actually carry this continent very high, higher than where it has been so far. At the same time, an initiative that is bound to succeed is one that enjoys a strong ownership across the board, within governments, private sector, academia, as well as broad and growing support base. In this regard, I think the step taken by the current government and the leadership of Eric this week to build and strengthen the support for the consultant free trade agreements within academia, within your world, and beyond, are both timely and significant on the part of economic transformations and regional integration within the African continent. Regional integration, which has provided the path to effective specializations of countries in the productions of goods and services, for which they have a comparative advantage with African models, it's a long-term project. It will take time. I think it took, I don't know how many decades for the European Union project to actually become real. It's a long-term project. Actually, it's a permanent project. And the strong involvement of academia will guarantee and strengthen its ownership across generations. In other words, it's not because that generation, the generation sitting here is going, that this project should not continue. In fact, we should be passing the baton to those who are running faster than us in that relay race to always prevail. This is very important. But rallying support within academia is also critical for evidence-based policy making. In the short and medium term, not only at the national level, but I believe increasingly at the regional and continental level. For instance, to establish regional value chains and competitive regional value chains, which are key for a successful implementation, but also for mitigating the risk raised earlier by the Minister of Trade of that disruption in global supply chains. The continent will play a major role in implementing the Afcft, but also in building strong and long-term, firm-to-firm relationship across board. You may have, for instance, to manufacture a cell phone, you have maybe 32,000 components. We may say, perhaps 10 components we manufacture in Cameroon, 15 manufacture maybe in Nigeria, maybe 5 in Gabon. Then we all assemble that in one particular country. In other words, every single country member of the Union will have its little piece in that final product coming out. That's how we deepen and really forge a trade integration project. That is a win-win for all. I think the regional value chain play a major role in that process of economic integrations. What I call consistently thinking continental and coherently acting local. Consistently thinking continental and coherently acting local will be key to ensuring that the Afcft deliver win-win development outcome for all its member countries. Consistently thinking continental and coherently acting local. The Asian journey toward deeper integrations through a common industrial policies actually paved the way for a successful export-led growth models, which later on enhanced integrations of Asia into the global economy as one of the most powerful regions today, actually. As in the process, Asia has become, it actually happened in 2018 when Asia became Africa's largest trading partner, overtaking Europe. After a century of that trade between Africa and Europe, Asia has actually done that over the last 3 years. And that is what can happen when there is a real integrations that's actually leading to a change in the patterns of growth and trade. What lessons can Africans draw from that successful experience of Asia? It's a task that you, the researcher, you, the expert, will actually help us understand to better formulate the policy that will actually ensure a successful implementations of the Afcft. Similarly, it is very important, I think the Minister alluded it earlier, and so did Professor Majem, conflict raging across the continents, including in Central Africa, we may just have a look at Central African Republic, are a major risk to the implementation of the Afcft. The negative impact of war and trade can be long-lasting. We have some statistics for you. Globally, violent conflict is estimated to cause a 26% reductions in export the year of the conflict outbreak, 26% reduction in trade. Then rising to 35% reduction 5 years later, and almost 60% a decade. We cannot really achieve the Afcft development potential in the absence of conflict, the absence of peace and security. Now remember, like Kofi Annan, there will be no development without security, and no security without development. Kofi Annan. What are the key results emerging from studies carried out by African research and experts on peace and security? And what policies and reform should be undertaken to create the conditions for lasting peace necessary for long-run growth and lasting prosperity across Africa This is another important area of research where we actually see the potential benefit for the continent beyond the Afcft implementation. At the same time, our research shows that while the Afcft is a necessary condition for economic development, it is not a sufficient one. I'm not downplaying potential, but I think it's important to be candid. The Afcft, it is a necessary condition, but it failed the test of sufficiency. In effect, one of the key constraints to sufficiency for the Afcft is a chronic deficit of science and technology. In a region where technology trap has been the main cause of poverty trap and intergenerational poverty. We saw it in the COVID. We could not manufacture vaccine for ourselves. The countries with the technology and know-how manufacture vaccine not only for their population, to fair game, but now we are forced to transfer the hard currency we do not have to import that vaccine. And Africa might put $2 billion, I believe, right? $2 billion into it. I think technology is a major constraint on the implementation of the Afcft. And this constraint, actually, the answer to that technology puzzle is you, actually. Quite frankly, it is African research and scientists to actually deliver the continent on that technology gap, while raising public investment towards scientific research. Currently very low. Africa accounts for just about 1% of world research spending. Insignificance. At least not commensurate with our population 17%. And development of scientific infrastructure is key. I think the government has to do its part. But we believe that closing Africa's scientific and technological gap largely depends on the intellectual wherewithal and scientific firepower of African scientists. It is you who will actually lead our effort, not those who are into the retirement age. I think the future is you. We've seen the fourth industrial revolutions. Clearly shows that the future is actually in your hands. We have to close that scientific and technological gap to make sure that we are ready to really put the Afcft on the path to fulfilling its development potentials. And the key question is that, what role are African science going to play to ensure close that gap and enhance its implementations? Meanwhile, I think the success of the Afcft also hinges on delivering a continental integration reform which consistently produces a win-win outcome for all its member countries. In other words, if we have a model which is actually benefiting only the big one, the more diversified ones, be it Egypt, South Africa, maybe Morocco, it's going to work. The reality is that countries at this stage are at a very different level on either the development ladder, but also the scientific endowment. And what policy should we put in place to ensure that gaps in productivity and competitiveness are gradually narrowed to foster a win-win integration outcome for income convergence, not only within the continent, but also globally? And the key questions for research: what are you, the researcher and scholar? As the minister said, those who are cogitating, the cogiteurs, going to do to actually help us close. And still, I think another important aspect is competitiveness is also very much determined by monetary arrangement, and specifically exchange rate policies. Exchange rate policies. And to mitigate the risk of competitive devaluations, think of Europe again. In the continental race to the bottom, in the quest for competitiveness gain, European Union leaders opted for a single currency, which kept the Union together, mitigating the risk of countries engaging or devaluing their currency to become more competitive. It kept the Union together, but raised other challenge in the absence of fiscal federalism. I think Europe achieved that. And the key question we have for you, our future, what lesson can Africa learn from that experience, European Union experience, as we engage in that process of regional integrations? It's a key question for you to advise the policymakers on the way forward. I think the Journal of African Trade, which is sponsored by Afcft, this is a copy. It's actually working on the first ever special issue on the Afcft and African trade. We are hoping to get it out sometime this year, as early as next month. And that special issue highlights the potential challenges associated with Afcft implementations. I would like to encourage you, the researcher and scientist, to consider using JAT as the only academic journal devoted to research in African trade as the primary outlet for your research and publications. I think this may become the Afcft journal going forward. At the same time, I think the Bank, the African Export and Import Bank, is actually actively working with leading African universities and research institutions to establish a network of Afcft study centers to carry out frontier research, both theoretical and applied, for evidence-based policy making during the Afcft implementation. I think this is very important. We are hoping to have such center within the Central Africa regions. This could be another opportunity for collaborations. But more than fostering broad-based support for the landmark continental trade agreements reform, the African scientific community, within the African scientific community, it will build and expand expertise in the field of regional integrations and economic development, and in the process, strengthen intergenerational commitment. We said it was a long-term project, so we're glad to have that commitment across generations, surviving the test of time. In the process, continuously deepening integrations. I think that intergenerational commitment will be critical for successful implementations of the Afcft. The good news is that African scientists, especially the younger generations, are ready. They are ready for the ongoing continental shift toward deeper integrations. If you have any doubt, just look at the latest African Youth Survey, which produced very interesting results. Are you ready? Are you ready? Yes. Very good. The survey revealed rising Afro-optimism and Afro-capability. I repeat, rising Afro-optimism and not Afro-pessimism, and Afro-capability. Driven by entrepreneurship, what we need to grow SMEs, post-colonial mindset, defragmenting African economies to enter the post-colonial world, digital technologies, science and technologies, and more importantly, share African identity. Share African identity. Over 76% of African youth agree that a shared African identity exists and is underpinned by a common culture and values. Transcending the artificial colonial construct. Transcending the artificial colonial construct. to fully embrace Pan-African values is necessary for success on the part of regional integrations, as well as lasting peace and prosperity within the continent. So this is a very important aspect, the shared values. Furthermore, on the same survey, and to further highlight the importance of science and technology, 81% of African youth believe that technology will change the fortunes of Africa. It changed the fortunes of Europe a century earlier, and those of Asia over the last few decades. And I wanted to end this remark, really, delivered within the context of this international conference on the Afcft and the dynamic regional integration in Africa, on the occasions of the 50th anniversary of Eric, with a quote from one of the greatest, if not the greatest leaders in the world. I think in the US government, among the US administrations, the best way to predict the future is to create it. I repeat, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Abraham Lincoln once said, for decades, Africa has been locked under a sticky colonial development model of resource extractions, commodity dependency, and fragmented economies, inherited from that Berlin conference. The Afcft provides the opportunity not only to the fragmented African economy to create the condition for scale, it also provides the opportunity to create a more integrated continent where lasting peace is delivering lasting prosperity. Where lasting peace is delivering lasting prosperity for a brighter future.
Excellences, Saint extérieurs de la République du Cameroun, Excellences, Monsieur le ministre d'État, ministre de l'Enseignement supérieur, chancelier des ordres académiques de la République du Cameroun, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, les membres du gouvernement de la République du Cameroun, Messieurs les commissaires de l'Union africaine chargés du développement économique, du commerce et de l'industrie, Monsieur le secrétaire général de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, Monsieur le président de l'African Export and Import Bank, Monsieur le directeur de l'Institut des relations internationales du Cameroun, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos rangs et grades respectifs. C'est pour moi un honneur et un agréable devoir de prendre la parole à l'occasion de ce colloque international consacré à la réflexion sur les rapports entre la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la ZLECAF, et la dynamique d'intégration régionale en Afrique. Permettez-moi, avant toute chose, de féliciter chaleureusement les organisateurs de cette rencontre qui vient à nommer au moment où le continent africain s'engage dans la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF. Les thèmes proposés pour ces colloques, la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine et la dynamique de l'intégration en Afrique, est en droite ligne avec les priorités du plan stratégique indicatif à moyen terme de 2021 à 2025 de la CAC, adopté en novembre 2020 par les chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la communauté économique d'État d'Afrique centrale. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, la communauté économique d'État d'Afrique centrale est constituée de 11 États membres. Tous ces États ont signé et ratifié l'accord sur la ZLECAF. Aujourd'hui, un seul État n'a pas encore déposité ses instruments Avec sa position géographique au centre du continent, la CAC est la seule CPR qui dispose d'une frontière physique avec toutes les autres communautés économiques régionales. Certains de ces États membres appartiennent également à d'autres communautés économiques régionales en Afrique centrale. La communauté, notamment la communauté de l'Afrique de l'Est, les marchés communs de l'Afrique orientale, australe, la COMESA, et la communauté de développement de l'Afrique centrale, la SADC. Comme la plupart des autres CER, la CAC dispose d'une zone de libre-échange avec une tarif préférentielle au taux des droits de douane nul pour la totalité des produits échangés entre les États membres, et même que des règles d'origine préférentielle. Les processus d'élaboration et l'adoption des instruments de l'Union douanière de la CAC est à un stade avancé. Un projet de protocole sur l'Union douanière de l'Afrique centrale est en cours de finalisation. De même que les tarifs extérieurs communs, les codes communautaires de douane et les instruments de défense commerciale. Une étude initiale pour la politique commerciale commune a été réalisée en 1998, mais il doit encore être mis à jour compte tenu des évolutions survenues dans les contextes aussi bien international, régional que national. Cette représentation de la CAC montre l'importance du rôle qu'elle doit jouer dans les processus d'intégration, notamment dans la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange de l'Afrique continentale africaine. Nous nous réjouissons donc de la tenue de cette importante rencontre qui permettra sans doute d'apporter de la lumière sur les pistes de solutions aux contraintes et difficultés qui pourraient rencontrer les États membres de la CAC dans la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF. Ceci est indispensable pour une participation réussie de l'Afrique centrale au processus de négociation et d'appropriation de l'accord de la ZLECAF. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, l'expérience de la CAC permet de mettre en œuvre 4 contraintes internes majeures dont dépend fortement la réussite de la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF en Afrique centrale. Premièrement, les faibles capacités des États membres à administrer et mettre en œuvre toutes les dimensions de l'accord de la ZLECAF, parallèlement au processus de négociation. Les travaux de votre colloque devraient nous aider à identifier les éléments pertinents pouvant alimenter un programme régional d'accompagnement pour le renforcement des capacités aussi bien des États membres et de la CAC pour l'appropriation et la mise en œuvre des instruments de l'accord sur la ZLECAF. Il convient de rappeler que cet accord est un instrument complexe qui comprendra à terme 7 protocoles et des dizaines d'annexes et appendices. Les réflexions de Colloque devraient également pouvoir jeter les bases des éléments à prendre en compte dans la stratégie régionale en cours d'élaboration de la stratégie nationale de la ZLECAF, afin d'assurer que ces stratégies sont alignées sur le plan de développement économique et social des États membres d'une part et des impératifs de coopération régionale pour maximiser l'impact d'autre part. La deuxième contrainte à laquelle fera face la mise en œuvre aussi de la ZLECAF est la faible capacité d'offre commerciale, qui est la conséquence du faible niveau d'industrialisation des pays de la région. Ceci justifie le rôle central qu'il convient d'aborder de la transition entre les unions douanières sous-régionales et l'Union douanière africaine, projetée à terme pour réduire les distorsions associées au mécanisme actuel de gestion des tarifs extérieurs communs existants en cours ou en cours d'établissement et qui peuvent retarder les processus de réformation du marché commun africain. Une autre dimension de la lutte de l'appartenance qui devrait retenir l'attention des intervenants au concours de cette colloque est liée à la capacité des États membres à honorer leurs engagements au sein des différentes communautés économiques régionales dans lesquelles ils appartiennent. C'est d'autant plus que l'appartenance à un processus d'intégration est marquée par un caractère d'exclusivité de la mise en œuvre de ces instruments à partir d'un stade de l'Union douanière. Il n'est pas possible pour un État d'appliquer des tarifs extérieurs communs ou d'avoir plusieurs monnaies qui ont cours légal sur son territoire. Enfin, la quatrième contrainte à laquelle la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF sera confrontée est la persistance des barrières non tarifaires au sein des États membres dans les procédures de commerce extérieur. À ce sujet, il est souhaitable qu'une attention particulière soit accordée au mécanisme d'élimination des barrières non tarifaires. Il est également indispensable de promouvoir la digitalisation des procédures dans la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF et de développer un programme de modernisation de la gouvernance des frontières physiques entre les États membres afin de réduire au strict minimum les barrières non tarifaires et accroître les flux de commerce transfrontalier en Afrique. Au-delà de ces quatre contraintes, trois défis particuliers, entre autres, nous semblent importants d'être mentionnés afin d'éliminer la réflexion, d'alimenter la réflexion au cours de ces colloques. Le premier défi est lié à la capacité des États à gérer les influences externes qui peuvent compromettre la dynamique de la ZLECAF et l'objectif de réduction de la dépendance des pays africains vis-à-vis des exportations de matières premières. L'Afrique et l'exploitation de ses ressources naturelles sont au centre Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, pour terminer, je voudrais réitérer mes sincères remerciements au gouvernement de la République de Cameroun pour cette initiative et renouveler mes félicitations aux organisateurs pour la tenue de cette réunion. Je formule le vœu que cette initiative se réalise et contribue à la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine au bénéfice de la population de toute l'Afrique et en particulier de l'Afrique centrale. La commission de la CAC dispose à y apporter sa contribution. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Alors, Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la Commission, l'auditoire et notamment les responsables ici vous remercie de cette présentation qui pointe de manière saisissante un certain nombre d'enjeux et de contraintes auxquels nous sommes confrontés dans la mise en œuvre notamment de la ZLECAF. C'est une contribution importante. Je voulais très rapidement peut-être prendre une ou deux questions pour vous permettre, sachant que votre emploi de temps est très serré, prendre une ou deux questions de l'auditoire auxquelles, si vous avez convenance, vous pourrez répondre avant de vous retirer. Alors nous prendrons une ou deux questions pour son Excellence, le Président de la Commission, pour vous présenter et vous poser votre question.
Et j'aimerais savoir, Monsieur le Président, dans votre programme, quelle est la stratégie qu'on va adopter pour permettre à tous ces acteurs-là, qu'ils soient commerçants, agriculteurs ou Bayam-Salam, comme on a l'habitude de le dire ici, quelle est votre stratégie pour les intégrer à la ZLECAF? Merci.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole et pour votre intervention. Je suis Patrice Kigombe-Logo, je suis ancien chercheur. La CEAC, l'Afrique centrale, est reconnue en Afrique comme cette zone qui héberge le bassin du Congo. Et on sait que quand on parle du bassin du Congo, on voit la production du bois. On voit la production du bois, on a la RDC, on a le Gabon, le Cameroun, la République du Congo. Et presque tous les pays du bassin du Congo produisent du bois. On n'arrive pas à comprendre, on ne saisit pas encore très bien les efforts qui sont développés par la CEAC dans le sens du développement du commerce intra-africain du bois. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de pays africains qui sont demandeurs du bois. Quand on prend par exemple le cas de l'Afrique du Nord ou de l'Afrique australe, est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, la CEAC peut travailler ensemble avec la ZLECAF pour développer le commerce intra-africain du bois? Merci beaucoup.
Pour les questions qui ont été présentées, pour moi, je le vois important parce que ça me donne l'opportunité, même à distance, de participer dans les colloques. Donc, je voudrais remercier les questions qui ont été posées. C'est vrai, on a les petits commerçants, et j'ai parlé des petits commerçants, et j'ai parlé études sur l'état relié dans les autres états de notre CAC, de façon qu'on puisse faire le dessin de notre conseil des affaires. Comment est-ce qu'on peut formaliser ce qui est le marché informel dans
invitation, vraiment d'avoir consacré de votre temps que nous savons très précieux, n'est-ce pas, à apporter votre éclairage, votre contribution à ce débat. Donc, au nom de l'assistant central modérateur de ce panel, je voudrais vous dire tous les remerciements de l'IRI, de son directeur, pour votre contribution importante, notamment aux débats qui vont certainement générer des résultats très positifs que nous porterons d'ici peu à votre appréciation. Nous vous remercions. Excellent, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup. C'est moi qui vous remercie au nom de la commission de la CRC et particulièrement au nom du commissaire en charge de l'environnement, agriculture, développement rural, parce que les questions présentées sont particulièrement de ces domaines. Merci à tous les participants et merci à la direction de l'Institut merci beaucoup.
Merci au président de la commission de la CRC qui avait tenu notamment à donner sa communication pour ce colloque. Elle a été faite. En ce moment, nous allons aller vers un partenaire très important. C'est un partenaire qui a la charge, n'est-ce pas, de la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAF. L'ambassadeur secrétaire général de la ZLECAF a dépêché à Yaoundé, chef de délégation, M. Peter Joy, qui est conseiller principal de l'ambassadeur secrétaire général de la ZLECAF, qui fera notamment le mot, l'allocution de son excellence. Alors, Peter, vous avez la parole.
Before I begin the presentation, let me also say here that I'm here with my colleague, Madam Afcft. She's a senior advisor, legal on the Afcft. For His Excellency the Secretary General, he would have wished to be here, as some of you know, we are having the Africa trade fair that's happening currently in Japan, so that's why he's not being able to come. But then, at the appropriate time, he will come to Cameroon. Before I also start, let me also acknowledge the presence of my dear brother, John Bertrand. He's been a doyen in this particular field. He has been part of this process right from the beginning. And just a few moments ago, he was telling me that he was once a student here, so that's also encouraging in terms of seeing somebody who was once a student here, making it big in the outside. Okay, so for the nature of the presentation today, I'll run through quickly and we can devote more time for questions. I notice a lot of you here are students, so you may be interested in knowing the state of play of the Afcft negotiations in terms of where we are currently. So I'll devote a lot more time to you in terms of some of the questions you may have for me. So in terms of the nature of the presentation, I'll just say a bit more in terms of the institutional structure. So a key thing to understanding the Afcft is also to understand what are the structures within which we are operating. I will be doing that by not going into the history. For most of you may have read about the history, you may have learned one or two things in terms of where we started from. But I'll just give a general overview in terms of the institutional structures. Another key question that may be coming from you as practitioners or upcoming diplomats would also be in terms of the phases of the negotiations. Where are we now? So you may have heard we have phase 1, phase 2 negotiation. So I'll also be touching on that, and then I'll end it by focusing the next steps in terms of what we have to do to get to where we have to get to. So in terms of the institutional structure of the Afcft, if you look through the agreement establishing the Afcft, it speaks to that. Before I come to speak about this particular slide, as some of you may already know, if you pick the Afcft agreement, it's structured in 3 layers. So first, we have an agreement establishing the Afcft. The second layer is the protocols that we have. So we have about 8 protocols. And then in the wisdom of the Summit of Heads of State, what they then had to do was to divide it into phases. So what we basically did was that in phase 1 and the phase 2, in the phase 1 negotiations, we basically tackled trading goods, trading services, and rules and procedures for the settlement of disputes. Now there's a second phase, which is where we are yet to come to. We've started some work in that area, but we have not completed work here. So there we'll be looking at investment, competition policy, and other areas. I'll come back and then speak a little more about that. The third layer of the Afcft agreement is the annexes and then the appendices to the protocol. So as I said, 3 layers. The first one is the agreement establishing the Afcft. The second is the protocols, and then the third we have the annexes and then the appendices. So if you go to the agreement establishing the Afcft, which is the first layer, in there you have a number of institutions mentioned. So if you go through articles 9 through 13, a number of institutions are mentioned. So these are institutions that are mentioned within the context of the Afcft. At the highest level, we have the Assembly of Heads of State and Government. So the Assembly has already been there. So it's been there for so long. The other institutional body we have is the Council of Ministers with responsibility for trade. So this is where the ministers meet and then they take decisions. So for example, the Honorable Minister that was here today is part of the Council of Ministers with responsibility for trade. So they will meet in their capacity as ministers of trade to take substantive decisions on the Afcft. Lower down, we have the Committee of Senior Trade Officials. So for example, the Secretary Generals we have from the different ministries in the 55 countries. They also meet in their capacity as senior trade officials. They will also then make a recommendation. And that recommendation will go to the Council of Ministers for them to take a decision. If you look lower down, we have the Afcft Secretariat, which is where His Excellency the Secretary General sits, which is where I happen to be one of the senior advisors to His Excellency the Secretary General. If you look to the right, we have the committees. So the committees are where the negotiations are currently taking place. If you look up, I said, this is Afcft implementing institutions. When we started the negotiations, we had a slightly different structure. So for example, there was a structure or institutional structure, for example, we call the negotiating forum. The negotiating forum today isn't part of the implementing institutions. However, the work of the negotiating forum is now mainly done by the committees. As much as possible, what we've done is that for each of the committees, like for example, they have a protocol and you have a committee. So for protocol on trading goods, then there's a committee on trading goods. And then the negotiations will take place within that committee. So from the committee level, then they pass it on to the Committee of Senior Trade Officials. Another key committee is also the Committee on Trading Services. So as I said earlier on, as much as possible, what we've done is that for each of the protocol, you then have a committee. So in the future, if we go into phase 2 negotiations, then the committees on investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade, women and youth in trade, blah, 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 they would also be having committees that will be doing the negotiations. Another key thing about the committees is that we have subcommittees as well. So for example, on the protocol on trading goods, you have the committee on trading goods, and then you have subcommittees. So one of the subcommittees is, for example, the committee, the subcommittee on rules of origin. So the issues to do with rules of origin, the negotiations take place there, they come up to the committee on the trading goods before it will go up. If you also go to trading services as well, we also have a number of subcommittees where the negotiations will take place before it will go up. The dispute settlement body is a unique area. So our big sister here, Akiso, that's where she's working, where in terms of issues that may arise from the implementation of the agreement, then you have that body that can help in facilitating whatever dispute that may arise. The Afcft Secretariat, as I said, is the main institution that will administer the implementation of the agreement. So the agreement that we have that responsibility. His Excellency, the Secretary General has the responsibility to drive, in terms of the negotiations, assisting the member states, facilitating the negotiations, facilitating the implementation, the monitoring, and the evaluation of processes. But the other key question, as practitioners, that may come from you is the Afcft Secretariat. What's the structure like? Who works there? How many people are there? What are the other key responsibilities? I'm sorry this doesn't come up here, but I'll just give a summary of what we have here. Basically, we have a structure that has been approved by the ministers, including your minister that was here earlier today. It's gone up to the Executive Council, and hopefully February next year, the summit would approve it. So we have a structure that consists of 296 persons. So, for example, when it's approved by the summit in February next year, the number of persons that can work at the Secretariat will be 296. So that in itself is full. That in itself is an opportunity for you upcoming diplomats who may want to also enter some of these days. And when the ministers were crafting this, one of the things they did was to have it in a pyramid shape. A pyramid shape meaning that they want more people to come at a junior level and then rise through the positions. So meaning it's heavy at the bottom. So younger ones like you who want to enter diplomacy, who want to work in institutions like the African Union, you have an opportunity not just at the African Union Commission, but the Secretariat is also there. And one of the unique things about our structure is this. You know, the Summit of Heads of State, they give so much importance or attention to the Secretariat. So what they have, for example, done is that His Excellency the Secretary General is not at the director level position. It's at the level of the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. So that you have the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, you have the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. The other person who is also very senior in the entire African Union system is His Excellency the Secretary General of the Afcft Secretariat. So that in itself should tell you that the Afcft, not like any everyday institution of the African Union, very high position given to His Excellency. He's a young person like you, which is also an opportunity for you, the youth, to aspire to higher height. So as I said, over 296 positions. So we have His Excellency the Secretary General. Then there are a number of director positions. So there's a director trading goods and competition that is then taking care of issues relating to trading goods and competition. There's a director for trading services, investment, digital trade, intellectual property right, also taking care of issues in those specified areas. There would also be a director that will be in charge of dispute settlement and legal affairs, which is also unique in its form. We also have a director in terms of in charge of customs and trade facilitation. The other two directorates, more administrative, so we have a director of finance, and then there's director administration and human resources management. The unique thing about this is that we have the directors from different regions. So for your region, the director you have is the director of administration and human resources. Is actually from government. So this in itself, I'm saying, is an opportunity for upcoming graduates like you. Before the end of the year, one of the things His Excellency the Secretary General has also done is to have an Afcft youth, a trade policy youth corps. So basically what that will do is to bring younger people who have just completed school, who will come to the Secretariat for a year and a steady negotiation, a trade policy negotiation, implementation processes at the Secretariat, and then go back to your respective countries to work in there. So that's also an opportunity in itself. When the opportunity opens up, a lot of you can then apply and then also come to the Secretariat and work in it. I think I'll run really quickly and then we can devote the rest of the time for the questions. Now the other key question is where we are in terms of the negotiations and the steps towards implementation. As some of you may have heard either through presentations, through your lecturers, through the media, in terms of the signatories, we have 54, so it's still 54. It's only the state of Eritrea that is yet to come on board. Then the other thing we also have is the ratification. So currently what we have is 42 African countries that have ratified. In terms of the state parties, we have 39. So here's the whole thing. It is one thing to sign the agreement. And for those of you that may be aware, 2018 in Kigali, that was when the agreement was open for signature. And then as you may have also heard on the spot, we had 44 countries signing at that time. Today, until now, we have 54. One of the fastest signatories or ratifications we've had of any agreement on the continent. But it is one thing to sign the agreement. So you go as a head of state, you sign. It is also another thing to come back to your country to present the agreement to your parliament, for the parliament to ratify it. For some countries, you have to go to the parliament. In other countries, the executive is clothed with the powers to do the ratification. So for example, Nigeria, they need not go back to the parliament, but the executive can on its own undertake the ratification process. So the point I'm making here is that one step is to sign, the other step is to ratify. And you also have to take the additional step of depositing your instrument of ratification for you to become a state party. So for you to be able to benefit from the Afcft, as previous speakers said, you have to become a state party. So to become a state party, I said first you sign, then you ratify, then you take the step of depositing. So Cameroon, for example, you've taken that 3 steps. You've signed, you've ratified, and then you've deposited. Then you are a state party. We just have a few that are yet to deposit to also become state parties. So we have Cape Verde, we have DRC, and then the United Republic of Tanzania. Guinea-Bissau just informed us they have ratified, but they are just awaiting the necessary legislating process, and then they also become a state party. Now, this is the architecture I spoke about earlier. So the 3 layers, the agreement establishing the Afcft, then the phases. Yes, so we will continue. Now, the other area that you may also want to be aware of, or you may also want an update on, is also in the area of trading goods in terms of tariff concession. You know, the agreement establishing the Afcft, as I said, has 3 layers. The agreement establishing the Afcft itself, the protocols, and then the annexes and the appendices. So one of the annexes to the protocol on trading goods is the schedules of tariff concession. So in a simple layman's interpretation, the schedules of tariff concession basically are the tariff duties. You know, for those of you that have been importing goods either into the country or maybe through a port, maybe a seaport. You know, normally when you import a car into the country, you have a customs officer that will then either go into a book and try to flip through and get you what duty you are supposed to pay on the thing you are bringing in. So if it's a car, to get you the duty you have to pay on the car. Or on his computer, you see him looking through that. Oh, you brought in a car, it's an electric car, so let me check how much duty you have to pay on it. That's the tariff concession. So that's the tariff book. Basically, you know, after you signed, after you ratified, after you deposited your instrument of ratification, you then have to submit your schedule of tariff concession. So, for example, Cameroon, you have to bring to the Afcft Secretariat or to the African Union Commission your schedule, which will tell other countries how you intend to do the liberalization. So you cannot just sign, ratify, deposit, and sit back. No, you have to, there are things to do. So you have to present a schedule to us to know, you said you want to implement the agreement, how do you want to do it? So the countries have already agreed on the modality. So if you want to say, okay, for a car, so they have it at 20%, but I want to bring it to zero. You have to tell us how do you want to bring it to zero? How many years do you want to do that? So the countries met, they have agreed on that. For the number that we have currently, we have 43 countries that have submitted to us tariff offers, telling us this is how they want to do the liberalization. You know, when you submit to us, we have to technically verify them to ensure that they are in line with the modalities that all the countries collectively agreed on. So what the modalities we agreed on was to the effect that of the 100%, so if you have a tariff book, sorry, I don't know for this region how many tariff lines you have, but typically for the ECOWAS region, they have 6,219 tariff lines. So what we agreed was that of that 6,219 tariff lines, we need to stagger the liberalization. So actually, that was what the member states had agreed on. So what they agreed on, and some of you may have heard either through your lecturer or through the press, we have 90% basket, we have 7% basket, and we have 3% basket. So basically, if it's the ECOWAS region, what the countries are saying is that out of that 6,219 tariff lines, 90% of that, when the agreement enters into force, they want to start implementing. The 7%, they said they want to implement or they want to liberalize. However, what they are saying is that they just want a longer transitional period because these products are relatively somewhat sensitive to their economies. Then there's also another third basket, which is the 3%, which the countries are saying, no, these products are super sensitive to us, so we do not want to touch them. So all in all, the level of ambition for the Afcft is 97%. So over a period of time, we said we want to liberalize 97% of our trade. I don't know whether you are following, but let me also just explain again so that you understand. You are saying tariff lines. You know, tariff line, for example, let's say you have chicken. I want to break it down as much as possible for, I don't know whether they've gone into these details, but so for example, if you have chicken, you can have live chicken, and if you have a live chicken, then that in itself counts as a tariff line. But you know, for a chicken, you can have different parts of chicken. So chicken wings, that's one tariff line. Drumstick is one tariff line. So it's the same chicken, but you have different parts. Even the same chicken, you can have fresh or frozen. That's also a tariff line. So these are the things that make up. So that thing I'm talking about, that customs officer, I think I saw a customs officer earlier. Yeah, they can explain to you better what a tariff line or a tariff is. So that is what I'm talking about here. I just want to, so that you get an understanding of what we are talking about, so that it doesn't become too abstract for you. So what has basically happened, as I said, was that 43 countries have submitted offers to us, to the Secretariat. What we have to do is to technically verify them. So when we technically verify them to ensure that if you are saying that 90% of 6,219 tariff lines will be 5,560 tariff lines, have you met that threshold as we have agreed upon?